Today, you are going to learn how to tell stories specifically in a professional environment, how to be good in conversations when you tell stories. If you don't already know who I am, my name is Yasser Khan. I teach CEOs the skill of speaking and storytelling. It's literally what I do for a living. So let me break down how to craft the story and then some tips on how to tell the story. This will be the most action-packed video you watch on storytelling. Now, I call my method of storytelling the 5 P's of storytelling. What are these 5 P's? If you just follow this structure, you will have a bare bones story in a matter of seconds, and you can improve it over time. So here's how it works. The 5 P's. The first one is the picture. What do I mean by picture? In a story, you have to establish where are we, who are the characters. So who, what, and where. So for example, if you are telling a client success story, you might say something like, I remember in 2012, we had a client from Silicon Valley, and then you talk about what you did with them. So this is painting the picture. Now, most people spend way too much time here. Yeah, we were working with this client in 2012. Interesting guy, actually. He had a nice BMW. And you know what? He was kind of, he was really into football. Or now we're going on into all these irrelevant details. So keep this just as concise as you can, especially if you're telling stories in a conversation. You don't want to go into a 5-7 minute story. You want to keep it around 90 seconds, maximum 2 minutes. So just paint a quick context. I remember about 3 years ago, we had a client from this industry who had this issue. That's it. So paint a picture, who, what, where. Then the problem. The problem is something most people don't spend enough time on, and in my opinion, it's what really makes the story. So imagine if you were watching Spider-Man or the Avengers, and they spent about 5 minutes on the villain, and they spent the rest of the movie on all the heroes. How interesting would the story be? Not very interesting. So here, you want to talk about what was the obstacle, what was the pain, what was the issue, what was the point of change. A point of change meaning someone had a dilemma or they weren't happy where they're at. What was the issue of the story? So this could be, we had a client come to us and they were struggling with their marketing. They had already spent $5,000 and they weren't getting anywhere with their business, and they were going to sink if they didn't fix this problem. So that's an example of a problem. Or you could take a more fitness-oriented example. I had a client who came to me who was trying to get in shape for 15 years, but he couldn't stop eating sugar, and he had tried the keto diet, the vegan diet, all these different diets, nothing works. So this will be your problem, and I want you to spend the most amount of your time here. Just when you think you have talked about the problem enough, I want you to dig deeper into the problem. So for example, a lot of people say, we had a client who had issues with marketing. They couldn't get enough clients. So then we did X, Y, Z, A, B, C, D, E, F, G. The bigger the pain, the bigger the payoff. The bigger the pain, the bigger the payoff. If there's just a little bit of pain and then you give them a payoff, people will say, okay, it was a minor inconvenience, and you help them with that inconvenience. Or sure, this person was here and now they're here, not a huge difference. But if the problem was severe, so for example, our client came to us for marketing help, they needed to get more leads, and they had already spent $150,000 hiring a CMO. That didn't work out. Then they hired an agency to spend another $100,000 on that. That didn't work out. Then they tried doing it themselves, and they blew about $200,000 on ads. Now they were almost bankrupt. So when they came to us, they said, listen, this is our last shot. If this doesn't work, we're going under. Can you help me? Then we did XYZ. Can you see how much greater the reward will be of that story because you've dug into that pain? So really think about, what is the pain, what is the problem, and then just when you realize what it is, dig deeper and deeper into it. And then also try to think about the implications of the problem. So if you're saying we had a client who could not quit sugar every single day, he would wake up and step on the scale and he would say to himself, man, I'm such a failure. Every single time I try to lose weight, I have no discipline. And he was telling me that, hey, listen, this is really affecting my self-esteem. I don't believe in anything that I set my mind to anymore. But can you see how I'm talking not just about the problem, but the implications on the people about that problem? So this is where we will spend a lot of our time. Then you have talked about your problem. Then you talk about the process. What did the character, the company, the person go through in order to climb out of this problem? So let's take a simple example. Max wanted to lose weight and he had been struggling with sugar, blah, blah. What did he do? So he was reading all these books about how to get in shape. He was watching all these YouTube videos, but nothing was working until he met Jonathan, the fitness coach. And he realized through Jonathan's process that the missing ingredient was accountability. He knew what to do, he just wasn't doing it. So when Jonathan showed up every single day to help him work out, counted his calories for him, make the diet plan for him, that's when he got the result. So essentially what I'm doing is I'm walking you through, what did we do? What process did the character go through to fix the problem? So for example, if we're talking about a movie here, what process did the hero go through to try to defeat the villain? What did they do? This is also the introduction to the solution. So think about, you have your pain here, this will be your cure, this is the medicine, this is the introduction. This is not quite the end of the story, this is just what did we start doing to address the problem, right? So I had really bad back pain, I went to the doctor gave me this medication, I started taking it, and in 2, 3, 4 days, I started to notice a difference. That process of going to the doctor, taking the medication, noticing the change, that is a process. So step by step, break it down. What did we do? Walk us through it. This could also be a story element, right? He first went to the doctor said this, then he went here and did this, so break it down. So far we've had the picture, who, what, where. Then we've gone into the problem, what was the main issue of the story. Then the process, what did we actually do? Then the payoff. The payoff is going to be the end result of the story. And this is not where the story ends. Well, I guess it could, but I don't like to end my story this way. The payoff is essentially the opposite of the problem. So for example, if I'm telling you a story about how someone was in debt and now they're extremely rich, look at the example of The Pursuit of Happiness. The problem was the person was really poor, they didn't know what to do. The process was they applied to many different jobs, eventually they found a job and they became rich. Payoff is they became rich. So this is the end of the story, and I want you to keep this in mind. The payoff has to show change. It has to show change. If your character was in the exact same position at the start and at the end, at least in this story, it's not going to be a great story, right? I was going to the gym, I worked out, but then I started eating a lot more, and I'm still going to the gym. Not a great story. But if I said, if I'm going to the gym, I went on this diet, and in the past 3 months, I've lost 40 pounds, and now I'm more motivated to get in shape than ever. Now it's a bit of a story because there's some sort of a change. So this payoff should be the opposite of the problem. Now, you might also be sharing a story that's not a good story, where someone had a problem, and the problem became worse. So for example, if I'm telling people what would happen if you drink too much soda, you can say, well, this person had a lot of weight on him and he kept drinking soda and had a lot of junk food in the meantime, soda, and now he's in a position where he's at the hospital, he can barely leave his bed, he can't really do anything. So now I've realized the importance of having a proper diet and exercising. So essentially I'm painting a payoff, but I'm giving you a message off of that. So if you're trying to tell a story that is inspiring, that is motivating, that has a positive outcome, which in most professional settings, if you're telling a client story, you would do, then this would be your happy ending, where what happened at the end. So this is your resolution. The hero defeats the villain and then runs off with a girl, or whatever it is the story ends at. That's the payoff. Now, at the end, what I like to do, I like to end with the point. What is the point of the story? I cannot tell you how many times I've heard someone tell a story and then the audience completely misses the story. They have no idea what the point of the story is, right? Oh, that was entertaining, but they don't really grasp the point of the story itself. I'll give you an example of the story at the end. So what you want to do is, after you tell the story, you want to, in plain English, tell them what the point is. So when I went through this experience, I learned XYZ. I learned ABC. So here's an example I'll give you.
When I came to Toronto, I was every real estate agent's dream come true. I was looking for an apartment to rent, and I went to my real estate agent and I said, hey, I've got a credit score of 570. All of my money is in cryptocurrency. I am unemployed, and I'm thinking about starting a new business, and by the way, I'm also single. Who's running the jump to help me? Not a whole lot of people. So when I went to Facebook Marketplace, I said, okay, I like this place. I'll send them a message. They will ask my credit score. Ghosted. I will go check out another place and, hey, I'm really interested. Okay, tell me a little bit about yourself. Ghosted. Every single person I would talk to, every single agent I would talk to, I would see two things. One, they would hear about my situation and immediately give up. This guy's hopeless, I'll move on. Or number two, they would find some little hole in the wall and say, yeah, $2,500 for that. I can sign the lease today. And obviously, I didn't want that. Now, this entire time, I was new in Toronto. I was living off of hotels. I didn't have a place to stay. And we're talking about a time when people wanted 6 months of rent up front. There was 5, 6 people already submitting their bids. Remember that time? That's the time I came to Toronto. So can you just imagine my desperation? I needed someone to help me. So what I would do is I would write this giant paragraph explaining my situation, my credit score, and I would copy paste it to every single ad on Facebook Marketplace. Hopefully someone replies. And after many nights of no one replying, one person replied. It was a real estate agent by the name of Barbara. And she said, Yasser, I know you're in a difficult situation. Let me see what I can do. The next day, she sent me 5 listings. 3 of them I really want. We go into the first one. Within 20 seconds of her walking into the place, she looks around, opens a cabinet, presses down on the feet. No, we're going out of here. We're going to the next one. No, I really want this one. No, you deserve better. It's okay. And we immediately go to the next one, then the next one, the next one. I'm thinking, what's this woman doing? I like the place. But then, not only was she able to find me a place, she was able to find me the place that I wanted at the rate I wanted without having to pay an entire year up front with my cryptocurrency. Can you imagine that? So once I finally had a place, you can imagine the relief I had, and I'll never forget Barbara, because she helped me at a time when no one else would help me. And now when someone comes to me and they say, hey, I'm looking for a place to rent. Do you have someone you could recommend? Who do you think I'm going to recommend? Barbara. But here's the thing. When they ask me, hey, do you have a mortgage agent or do you have a real estate agent? I don't say I just have an agent. I said, hey, if you want someone mediocre, I don't have anyone for you. But if you want someone who can pull off a miracle, you got to call Barbara.
It's not very difficult, is it? First, who, what, where, the picture. What was the problem? What was the issue? What was the dilemma here? What was the process someone followed? What was the steps someone went through? What was the payoff at the end? And what's the point of the story? Simple. Now, we've talked about the crafting piece. Let me give you some tips on the delivery of the story. Because you can write a great story, but if you tell it in a way and it sucks, no one's going to feel it. So the first point is it has to be about change. I know I mentioned this earlier. Any good story has to show change. If the character of the company, if whoever you're talking about was at this position and they're at this position at the end and they haven't really gone through anything, there's no change, no ups and downs in the story, it's not interesting. It's just not interesting. So if I said, I woke up in the morning, I brushed my teeth, and then I was really hungry, so I got myself some food, and after I got some coffee, then I went to work, and then I went to sleep. How interesting is that story? Not very interesting, but if I said I woke up in the morning and I opened the fridge and I didn't have any coffee, I didn't even have any eggs. I completely forgot to do the groceries. So I went to the grocery store, and turns out it was a public holiday and the store was closed. Now what do I do? So now I'm looking around for breakfast. But the thing is, I'm on a diet and I can't just eat anything. I have to eat a specific type of diet. Can you see how there's stakes built up now and there's some change involved? So you have to show change in a story. The second thing with a story is you have to relive the story. I can tell you the story, but if you don't feel anything, you're not going to believe it, and you're not going to be enamored by the story. You want to be in my world. So what I have to do is I have to create images in your mind. And the way I like to do this, I like to place the person in my story. So I would say something like, if you were there with me, you would have seen me do this. If you were there in the room, if you were a fly on the wall while I was having this conversation, if you saw me when I was on stage, you would have noticed you were there with me. And then I will paint the picture as if you're watching it through your eyes. If you were there in the auditorium, you would have seen about 300 people. You would have seen a stage with a bright spotlight on it with a red curtain behind it, and you would have seen me shivering backstage. You see the imagery there, right? So you relive the story and you tell it with emotion. So the first one is change. The second one is you relive it. Third one, you want to make it relevant. Now, unless you're doing it just for the sake of entertainment, then it's fine. But if you're telling a professional story about a client success story, or you're telling a story about how you're really good at something, make it relevant to them. You can have the best story in the world, but if it's not relevant to them, they're not going to care. So if you are in a meeting with a client or a prospective client, and you want to help them with their public speaking, let's say, and they say, hey, I'm a CEO, I speak in front of thousands of people, I need to learn how to present with confidence. And you start telling a story about how you helped a high school girl, it's not really going to be relevant to them, even though the process you went through might be similar. But they'll say, okay, great story, I don't really see how that appeals to me. What does that have to do with me? So you have to make it relevant. Number 4, have a point, and preferably repeat the point. One of the things that I really like doing, again, go and watch my TED Talk after this. You will see everything that I'm telling you now. I like to repeat my point several times. So the main point of my TED Talk was not what you say, it's what they remember. It's not what you say, it's what they remember. Notice how I said it twice. So every time I will say a phrase, my main point, something I want people to remember, I will say it twice, and then I will also say it in several different moments. So in my TED Talk, I say it about 3 minutes in, then I say it again about 12 minutes in, then I say it again at the end. So by the time my story ends, people have no doubt what the message is. What I also like doing, I like giving people the point as close to the end as possible. What do people remember? They remember what happens closest to the end, because that's the most recent thing, right? So when you end a story, that's the best time to tell people what your point is. So what I learned from this experience, what I'm hoping that you take away from this is, and that's the point. So far we've talked about change, relive it, relevant, point, and then you want to make it a visual, and you want to give them an auditory experience. So think about stories as an experience for people, right? If you are in a presentation setting and you have slides behind you, use those slides to show what you're talking about. So one of the things that I do in my free master classes, I can tell you that I was really nervous. I can tell you, hey, I started when I was broke, I had no money. But I will also show you an image of me sitting on a chair with an empty apartment around me with nothing but a pile of books and a laptop, because I want to visually show you where I'm at. Now, you don't always have the luxury of being able to show this, but in a presentation, if you can do this, do it. Now, audio-wise, I have examples of when I deliver a presentation or a story, and then I have the reaction of the crowd. They're, oh my God, this was an amazing workshop, great keynote, well done. I will show people that so they can hear it and they can feel what the audience in that room felt, what they felt after my story. So think about creative ways to enhance your storytelling skills, okay? So there's a lot more that I can talk about, but this really is the gist of storytelling. Let's just do a quick recap. The 5 P's of crafting a story. Picture who, what, where, what was the problem, really dig into the problem. What was the process? What did these characters do to escape from the problem? What was the payoff? What was the end result, the end state? This should be the opposite of the problem. What was the main point? Again, remember this. What was the main point of this? And then for delivery, make sure the story has something to do with change. Things are going up and down. Relive the story, feel all the emotions. Remember, what you feel, they feel. What you feel, they feel. If you don't sound excited, you don't sound agitated, you don't sound sad, they're not going to feel that way. Make it relevant. Tell them a story that has something to do with them. They can apply. They can say, oh, wow, that affects my life. Now they'll listen. Make a point and repeat that point several times. And lastly, if you can, try to add some visual or auditory elements to your story.